Well, it's our last little story time with Grandma Jen. And I wanted to say it's been a pleasure. It's been a blessing to me. And I've never had so many little children gathered for a bedtime story in my life, so it's been really special. And I hope you've been blessed as well. Amen. Our topic tonight is flourishing financially. I was thinking about how money is an index to the heart, and Jesus knew that when he had his conversation with the rich young ruler, where basically the young man claimed to be obeying all 10 of God's commandments, and Jesus kind of almost added an 11th commandment and said, then sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. And we know the story. The man went away sorrowful. Well, fortunately, not everybody goes away sorrowful, and I want to tell you a story tonight about someone in my life who did not. And actually, I'm going to read the story because my mother, who's a wonderful writer, wrote the story based on an experience we had with my oldest daughter when she was 3 years old. So it was a Christmas morning, and we have a family gathering, and that's where she's taking us from, was that Christmas morning at this annual family gathering. It was Christmas morning at our home, and 3-year-old granddaughter Allison watched wide-eyed as each family member opened gifts, taking turns, as was the family custom. Little sister Kimberly was equally enchanted with the wonderment of the occasion, mimicking Allison's every expression. Allison chose her first gift, a tiny package from her Uncle Scott. To her infinite delight, it was a bag of foil-wrapped chocolate coins. Go ahead and show me the first slide here. Well, do you guys have we have these, it's a big Christmas thing. Anyway, well disciplined by her nutrition-conscious parents not to overindulge in sweets, she carefully tucked the coins in her pocket where they would remain until a special treat time determined by her mother. So I was a real kind of mother, and I didn't let my kids eat between meals. I didn't give them very much sweets, and they definitely didn't get chocolate on a regular basis. So this was really exciting for her. The next evening, we all went to a local restaurant. As we finished our meal, I noticed that Allison was especially quiet. I realized she was industriously tearing her paper napkin into small squares. She then withdrew the little bag of coins and carefully wrapped each coin, all but one, in a square. The one saved was understandably for Allison. Finally, she proudly announced that it was her turn to be the giver. The first tiny present went to Uncle Scott, who feigned surprise at the contents. The presentation continued to Stuart, Kristen, her mom and dad, and Papa. Suddenly, a look of alarm and dismay flashed across her face as she discovered she was one gift short. She looked at me, then at the unwrapped piece she had saved for herself. Without a word, she tore off another piece of paper and with her hands held beneath the tabletop so that no one could see, she carefully wrapped the silver dollar-sized chocolate coin. Here, Grandy, she said, this is your Christmas present. She didn't have one left for herself. The little gold coin rests on my desk, and my mom kept it for years afterward. It finally oxidized and just was gone. But she said, I kept it on my desk where it will remain a daily reminder of the true spirit of Christmas. It represents the most precious gift I have ever received. Amen. Little children can say some pretty and do some pretty profound things. I remember a conversation with my other daughter. She was upset because she prayed for her birthday meal. It was her birthday meal, and she prayed. We had her pray. It was her birthday, and she bowed her head and said, bless this food, please help it not to make me sick. And I just thought that was funny, and so I laughed, and she got offended, jumped off her chair, and stalked into the living room and wouldn't come to the table. So I went up to her, and I tried to, coax her to come back to the table, and she said no. She was mad at me, and I then told her that she should forgive me, and she said no. And I said, well, God forgives me. When Jesus was on the cross, he said, Father, forgive them. Every good Adventist parent preaches the gospel every chance they get. Well, God forgives me, and Jesus was on the cross, and he said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And so God forgives me, Kimmy. And she looks at me, and she goes, I'm not God. I kid you not. It was weird. like weird kids, So I want to tell you a little bit about my experience in life. I was raised in pretty comfortable circumstances. Money was never a worry. I'm not saying we were wealthy per se. I would say upper middle class, but money was never a worry. And there were points in my life when I realized that really, compared to the rest of the world, I was a child of privilege. One of the points was we had a cleaning lady come every week. Her name was Estelle, and she came from another part of town. She was a black lady, and there was just all this racism in my country. And I grew up in an all-white world, and I remember wanting to make friends with this lady, but feeling like there was this huge gulf between myself and her class-wise and race-wise. And so all I did was every Tuesday I would come home from school and I'd see her cleaning and I'd say, "Would you like some orange juice, Estelle?" And she'd say, "Yes, I'd like that very much." And I'd say, "Well, I'll put it over on the table here." And she'd say, "Thank you." And that was all I could manage at that point. But I became aware that I was a child of privilege as time went on. Thank God the Lord saw fit to lead me down a path where I saw the other side of the tracks. And the way that happened was pretty simple. Basically, as a young adult, I got involved in ministry. I became a Christian and then a Seventh-day Adventist, and I dove into self-supporting ministry and really became what I would call ministry poor for many years. During the crucial phase of life when you're kind of getting a training for what will be your career in the future, and that'll be your stable source of income, we were basically told in this ministry context, which I have indicated before was somewhat unbalanced and even fanatical, that it was worldly to go to college and that we should just do whatever was at hand. And so as a result, we missed that window of opportunity to get training, both my husband and I. And when we finally left that ministry scene, we really kind of floundered to figure out how to do life. Well, fortunately, my husband was a very physically powerful man in his day, and he became a roofer. And he could earn really good money as a roofer, but we would go through periods of time when we would bottom out financially because he would fall off the roof on not a regular basis, but it did happen. And I remember this one particular time, he was on a ladder on a roof, and the whole ladder tipped over, and he went spread eagle on the ground, shattered his wrist. He went to the local hospital. It was called Day Kimball Hospital, and we called it Day Killam Hospital because it wasn't that great of a hospital. Anyway, they didn't set his arm right, and he had to go like several states away to find a really good doctor to set his arm. This particular day that I remember, my husband got another roof-related injury and was disabled and could not work, and we had just moved into our brand new home that he had built for us with our two small children, one 4-year-old maybe, and the other was 2. She was just barely walking, just a little tiny girl. And we moved into this big, beautiful house that wasn't finished that he had built for us. And we had a mortgage that we had to pay every month, and that was a huge responsibility, and it was a lot of money for us at that time. And I remember him getting injured and us having no way whatsoever to pay the mortgage. And what the Lord did was he moved upon some friends. You know, when you have friends, you have wealth, right? And so we had friends, and they knew the situation we were in. And so I was just sitting in my home, wringing my hands one day, and into the front door walked a friend with a bag of oats, and another friend with a bag of rice, and another friend with a bag of lentils, and another friend with groceries. And friend after friend came in with food supplies and all kinds of gifts. And we had a housewarming party that I knew nothing about. And as I was opening through the presents, I remember getting a card and opening it. It was from my friend Charlie, who actually owned a piece of land next to us and was a dear friend. He was a quadriplegic. He'd had a trampoline accident as a young adult and had never walked since then, but he made the best of his life and was an amazing guy. And he knew we were in trouble. And I opened this letter, and there was a check. And the check was for several $1,000s. It was exactly the amount we needed to pay the mortgage, and we just got to the point where my husband was able to work again. So God knows how to provide for his people. But, you know, several things converge in my adult story to make my financial situation kind of unique. See, I'm not a pastor. I told you before, my husband I asked him, do you want to be married to a pastor? He said no. And being the obedient wife that I am, I decided not to go into that. So, this is good because it frees me to have more time to travel. I can leave and go to Australia for 2 weeks, I don't have to worry about my home church. I don't know what Nathan is thinking. He's apparently left it in very good hands. Let's just hope so. But because I'm not on a payroll, every time I fulfill one of these engagements, I have to basically negotiate my paycheck. And that tends to be kind of a challenging thing. You have to learn assertiveness, and you have to have that kind of uncomfortable conversation about money that most people in a regular job have maybe once a year or at the beginning of their employment, and there's a steady raise process or whatever, but you just don't have to have it every time you go away for a weekend. But I have to have that conversation, and it's not a comfortable thing, but I've learned how to be assertive, and that's a good thing. Because I've found that if we're not assertive about our needs, we'll end up being bitter. And I'd rather be assertive and be a little bit uncomfortable with having to be assertive than retreat to my comfort zone of not saying anything and then being bitter. So what I do with these engagements is I make sure they go well. If it's at all possible that they go well, I make sure that they go well. And so what I do is, I negotiate whatever it is with whoever's hosting the event, and we work through the finances, and it's very simple. I have a simple formula. I'm not asking much, but I just want it to be fair to everyone concerned. And the vast majority of the time, they fully agree with it, and it's all cool. And sometimes they forget. I come and do my part, and I leave, and they say, we'll send you a check, and wave as you're driving off into the distance. And sometimes they just kind of forget, because out of sight, out of mind. So I'll have my billing secretary catch up with them, and that works out pretty well. And if that doesn't work, I have my husband call them. And it's amazing. I've literally had the experience where a pastor promised a certain fee and didn't send it, and I called and he didn't send it, and I called again and he didn't send it, and I said, Michael called, and it was in the mail the next day. There's something about a male voice on the phone, and I believe in fully harnessing that energy and taking advantage of that. So I want to tell you one particular story that was really interesting. I was invited to speak for a group of pastors. Now, David and Nathan are rock stars in the church, and they go, all over the place, and they get asked to speak for pastors all the time, but usually people see a woman and they think, we'll have her speak for women, so it was really an honor to be able to speak for a group of pastors. And I like deep theology, and I like studying and presenting challenging material. And so I had a particular book I'd written, and the conference president read the book and decided that he wanted me to come speak to the pastors. And I did, and I came, and I was so excited, and I did my presentation, and there were really only two pastors that came up and mansplained to me what was wrong with my presentation. I think there were only two. I remember one. I can see it like it was, he just came up like with this look on his face like, let me just explain what was wrong with that. So, but I got through it, and I just listened and I got through that, and it wasn't too uncomfortable, but the rest of them sat, and listened, and it was just really an exciting time. And then I got to my last sermon, and I preached the Mary Magdalene sermon, which is my favorite sermon to preach. And I'm in the middle of that sermon, and I'm talking about how Mary took all of her life savings and just poured them out for this offering for Jesus so she could anoint him for his burial, and how she poured everything. She had a year's wages, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. She just poured it out for the service of God. And in the middle of my pouring out sermon, I realized that's exactly what I'm doing, because I completely forgot to mention finances with these people, and I don't even know if they're reimbursing my plane fare. And I remember that right in the middle of the sermon. I thought, I'm a living example of what I'm talking about. It was absent-mindedness on my part, but it's still that I was a living example. So I remember at the end of the sermon, the conference president got up. And when you're at these retreats and things, they'll give you sometimes a little basket or a little gift bag at the end, and for women it usually has soap and lotion, and sometimes granola bars and little juice packs and special little things all wrapped up in tissue paper, and you kind of go through it. And sometimes they'll have a nice little crisp little white envelope that'll have a check in it, which is what you really want. And you look at the check and you think, I'll be able to eat this week, And so I was kind kind of looking in this thing, and it only had one thing. They gave me this gift, and it only had one thing. And that was a package of gooseberry pancake mix. And all the things Neil Nedley says about oxidized cholesterol and sugar and milk and all these things in pancake mix flashed through my mind, and I thought, I'll never be able to eat this. But, I learned very young that you don't have to like a present to thank someone for it. So I said, thank you, that was so thoughtful. I've never received gooseberry pancake mix before. Thank you so much. And I took my gooseberry pancake mix, and I was just so thankful that they were willing to have me come and share with the pastors. But another thing happened that weekend that was really special. God sent a young man named Randy Maxwell. He's an author, beautiful man, pastor. And he came to me and he said, Jennifer, have you ever been anointed before? And I said, not by human beings. So I think God has anointed me for ministry, but to be honest with you, my whole adult life, I've been in lay ministry, self-supporting ministry. I have a nonprofit corporation, and there's an expression that Fred Astaire, who was a famous American dancer, he danced with his partner, Ginger Rogers, and Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards with high heels. And sometimes I feel like I'm doing things backwards with high heels. I've worked very hard, but by the grace of God, I've really enjoyed every moment of it. And so he came to me and he said he wanted to have an anointing service with he and his wife. And we went off in a corner somewhere in the forest there in the retreat center where we were, and we had an anointing service, and it was really powerful. And I knew that God had looked down on me with my gooseberry pancake mix. And go ahead and bring up the next slide if you don't mind. And told me that he loved me. I want to share one more thing with you, and that is that what I do with ministry is under my nonprofit corporation, the Lord will give me an idea of something that needs to be done, some kind of ministry that needs to take place. And I go forward on faith. That's what I do. And when a ministry is new, it's fragile, and it needs a lot of TLC, a lot of nurture, a lot of nutrition, so to speak. And you'll put everything you have into building that up and helping it stabilize. And sometimes you have to do it at a sacrifice. And so one of the ministries that the Lord has given me recently is something called the Bucket Brigade. Go ahead to the next slide. And this is a ministry that, and I've mentioned this before, helps people learn how to deal with sexual abuse in a church context. Because I'm determined that our church becomes a city of refuge for the weary, and that our church become a safe place. And a church can't be a safe place while it's a safe place for unsafe people. And so I believe that we need to be on the offensive against abuse in our midst. Yes. But it's not the kind of ministry that garners you favor with everyone. And you're going to see that in a moment. So what we do with the Bucket Brigade is we have trainings, and we train people how to deal with abuse allegations, okay? So the first training we had was called the Defender Brigade, and it was all males. We had an all-male training, and we joked and said that there's three of us, three women, that were doing the training, and we said it was people without testes teaching people with testes how to have testes. Only we didn't use that in verbiage, but anyway, you get the point. And so, the point is this, that we're trying to help people understand the principles of love and their fullest spectrum. Because when you're dealing with spiritual leadership that is willing to take advantage of a spiritual office to exploit congregants, niceness is not the appropriate response. Love is the appropriate response, but true love is justice and mercy. And so true love will go on the offensive against that destructive force in order to protect the vulnerable. We have too much sloppy agape in our church. The definition of love has been very sentimentalized by our society, and it has crept into the church, and we need to get wise on this issue and go on the offensive for the sake not only of the vulnerable, but of the perpetrators themselves. Because as I preached Sabbath morning, Simon the Pharisee, who had perpetrated on Mary Magdalene, was a candidate for the kingdom of God and became a steadfast disciple of Jesus. But because Jesus called him out on what he had done and confronted it, he was saved. That's the whole point, is the salvation of everyone concerned. So that's what we believe in, and that's what we do. And I wanted to share one story with you that happened kind of in closing here, and you'll see what a complete train wreck I am. There was a pastor in a neighboring state. The pastor was acquainted with a couple of friends of mine, and they talked to me a little bit about him, and I had some concerns, but nothing really concrete. Suddenly, a female employee of that church left her place of employment. Nobody knew why. It was a mystery. A couple of months later, a young woman about 21 years old came forth to these friends of mine and said that the pastor and she had been studying the Bible. She was studying the Bible because she was going to get married to a Seventh-day Adventist young man. She wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist, wanted to be married in the church. So she was studying our message, brand new convert, excited to learn about the scriptures. And can you imagine, the pastor said to her, "You need to know about these things because you're going to get married," pulled out his laptop and wanted to look at pornography. Yeah, true story. Yeah, he's a pervert. She reported this to these friends. They came to me. I said, we need to do something. I wrote a letter. Long story short, he was let go. Long story short, he was hired again in another conference shortly after that. Long story short, I had a friend in that conference. I contacted her. Long story short, she said, he's my new pastor. Long story short, I wrote another letter, and long story short, they let him go. But there was a lot of drama in between those long story shorts. As a result, and the funny thing about it is that the conference will not allow me to speak in that conference anymore. It's kind of a shoot the messenger thing. I did the best I could. I was as compassionate and measured and careful as I could be. I don't know why they're mad at me, but I kind of don't take it personally because I consider it just a casualty of the calling. So anyway, shortly after that, I received a letter from this man and his lawyer, actually. And I'm not gonna give you his name. I'll just call him Mr. Pickle, okay? So here's the letter. At the top, in bold letters, cease and desist. Dear Ms. Schwirzer, this law firm represents Mr. Pickle. If you are represented by legal counsel, please direct this letter to your attorney immediately and have your attorney notify us of such representation. You are hereby directed to cease and desist all defamation of character and reputation of Mr. Pickle. And then it goes on, and then at the end it says, accordingly, we demand that you, A, immediately cease and desist your unlawful defamation of Mr. Pickle, and B, provide us with prompt written assurance within 10 days that you will cease and desist from further defamation of Mr. Pickle's character and reputation. Unfortunately, without a full retraction of your claims, Mr. Pickle is entitled to seek monetary damages and equitable relief from your defamation. Please be advised, Mr. Pickle is pursuing all available legal remedies, blah, 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 blah. So I read this letter. I did have a lawyer. I did inform my lawyer. He said, wow, that's aggressive. But then we talked about it, and we decided to do nothing. No, I'm not going to tell him that, promise, okay, I'll never say anything again. No, I will tell the truth about you. That's all I did to begin with, and I will continue to tell the truth if I believe that the lambs of the flock are in harm's way. So anyway, but I honestly went through 3 days. It was kind of like Jonah in the belly of the whale, of sweating it out, because, weird things happen. And maybe I would lose everything I had, and I was not sleeping well, and I was feeling that churning in my stomach for a few days. But at the end of the 3 days, I broke through, and the sun started shining again. And I said I would do it again the same way. Even if I lost everything I had, and believe me, it's been with, I actually earn money as a counselor. That's my stable income right now, and it goes into my nonprofit corporation. So I fund these projects by earning money for them and do not take a check from the corporation. That's how I function. I pour everything I have into God's work, and I was standing to lose everything I had, and I had built up with blood, sweat, and tears over the years, but after 3 days of sweating that out, I said I would do it the same way again, even if I lose everything I have. My Father has the cattle on 1,000 hills, and He has enough supply to replenish my little bucket, and I will at least walk away with a clear conscience. And so whatever you do, however you manage your finances, walk away with a clear conscience. And I think I'm going to end there because I think we're a little behind. But it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for listening to it. It's been very therapeutic, actually. It's been like one big therapy session with, like 300-400 counselors. And I so appreciate it. You can bill me and hope for the best.